Hey everybody, Mr. Moppin coming at you with another APUSH video. We're taking a look today at topic 6.7, dealing with labor in the Gilded Age. And remember folks, when we say Gilded Age, the age of industrialization, late 19th century, it's all the same time period. So just make sure you keep that in mind. Now, previously we looked at the rise of industrialization from more of a business owner's perspective. Now we're going to be looking at it from a worker's perspective. And, when we talk about factory workers, that percentage of the U.S. population is just growing and growing as we go through the late 19th century. Take a look at this. By the beginning of the 20th century, 2/3 of Americans now had wage-based jobs. In other words, jobs where you're getting, paid on a daily basis as opposed to, farming and things like that. And those that did earn a daily wage typically had unskilled jobs. So you're talking about just brute labor to be able to, earn your living. We have seen, workers, enduring struggling conditions. And we're going to talk quite a bit about that in this video. One of the things is you're talking about typically, 60-hour work weeks, 10-hour shifts a day, 6 days a week. Remember, this is still a time period where Saturday is not considered a day off. It's considered just another work day, like a Tuesday or a Wednesday. And as we've said previously, with this large supply of labor, be it from folks that had, put down the plow and given up farming to recent immigrants, you've got this large base of labor, and then you're going to be kind of, seeing the laws of economics play a factor in that. If you're looking at like, Ricardo's iron law of wages, it's basically the idea that economic factors will always kind of drive down the costs of things to its absolute minimum that it has to be functional. And that's going to basically explain, why wages are going to be, pretty darn low, relatively speaking. Now, that being said, when we talk about the overall cost of living in terms of real wages, yeah, that's going to increase during this time period. But note, you're not going to be keeping up with the wealthier Americans, the pace at which they're going to be accumulating wealth. And it is going to become, a situation where if you are of the poor working class, which is a very big, broad percentage of the population at this time, it's not going to be unusual to, have to have the husband and the wife both trying to work, also included in the mix, children working outside the home. You can see here, by 1900, 20% of children, 1 in 5, were now working jobs outside the home. And so, when we talk about, these workplace conditions that are beginning to emerge, it's certainly a transition from what farming used to be. When you were a farmer, you had some sense of independence. You had a sense of, okay, I'm going to get up when I feel it's appropriate. I'm going to stop working for the day when I feel like it's appropriate. I'm going to be responsible for a number of different things in a given day, and especially over the course of an entire year. And so you had more of a sense of ownership. You had more of a sense of, okay, I have a sense of responsibility over the entire process. You certainly had much more of an emotional association with what you were doing. But now that you're working in a factory, that has changed quite a bit. Especially when we start to get, as we get towards the beginning of the 20th century, and the use of more and more, assembly line methods to try to produce goods. There's this sense of, all I do is a singular job. Like it might be, I don't know, it might be, once cars start to be developed, it might be, putting the bumpers on a car, and you just do it again and again and again and again. And you feel, less like a human being and more like, just another piece in the machinery in many respects. I mean, this is, for a lot of these folks, this is monotonous, boring, to some extent mind-numbing work. Somebody that, in an urban setting, pre-industrialization might have been a skilled shoemaker, and they were responsible for the entire process of making that shoe. Well, now, if you're in a factory that's making shoes, you might be just responsible for attaching, the sole to the shoe, and that's it. Again and again and again and again. On top of that, this is a time, of course, where the government had a relatively laissez-faire attitude regarding, the operation of businesses, which allowed companies to not only keep wages low for workers, but really put little to no investment in workplace safety. It was very common for workers to get injured on the job. Factories were loud. In many cases, ventilation was not very good. So it was very, very common for workers to get hurt, some permanently. And if you were permanently injured and you could no longer work your job, there was no workman's compensation back then. So if you were injured on the job, you're on your own. That's it. And somebody else was already walking in to replace you. And so it only adds to the idea that, you felt like you were part of the machinery. And if you got wore out like a piece of machinery, you just got replaced like another piece of machinery. And so, you had this sense now that you don't have some sort of intrinsic value. You don't feel like you have ownership over the process. You don't feel like you have any kind of an emotional attachment to what you're doing. And so, this is going to be a very, very difficult and challenging transition that we are seeing American workers experience during this time period. Now, I did want to focus just a little bit more on the realities of child labor and how dangerous this was at the time. When we're talking about, using children as part of the workforce, understand that, it's not like today where there is a sense that, as a teenager, for example, you want to work outside the home to, make a little extra spending money for yourself, and, have, some sort of sense of independence, perhaps. This is a totally different situation. We are talking about kids not choosing to work outside the home, but having to work outside the home to literally be able to cover the cost of rent for their families, put food on the table. You're talking children as young as, 8, 9 years of age. You can see here in some of these photographs working in pretty dangerous conditions, be it a textile mill or a coal mine or something along those lines. These kids are going to really be exploited. Employers are going to be willing to employ children because you could get away with paying them about half of what you would pay a grown man. The children are easily dominated, easily manipulated, easily intimidated by workplace managers, and so child labor was commonly used. And think about to what detriments. Think about what is going to be the result of using children for labor, in this time period. Imagine, for example, if you look up at the picture above, imagine that you're a kid, that starts working in a Pennsylvania coal mine at about, age 10. And you have to do it in order to, keep your family fed. Well, if you're working in that coal mine, you're not in school. You're not learning skills. You are just working. And, if you do that year after year, by the time you become an adult at age 18, all you know how to do now is work in a coal mine. You don't have the skills to really become marketable in anything else. So what do you do now as an adult? You keep working in that coal mine. And of course, working in a coal mine like that, where you did not have, workplace protections and environmental protections and things like that, you might end up working in that coal mine until age 45 and die of black lung. Think about how tragic a life that is. Exploited at a young age and doomed to a life of poverty and a very stunted, shortened life. And that unfortunately became the fate of many, many children during this time period. So child labor was an especially, odious part of the industrial revolution in America in the late 19th century. So once again, you can see here, when we talk about, labor, and not just with children, though it's depicted here with children, there is just a general sense that workers are being manipulated, that they're being exploited in the name of, almighty profits, to allow business owners to have just a little bit more money and a little bit more money and even more money. And so, if you are a laborer and you feel like you are not being looked after, you feel easily replaceable, you feel as if you're just another cog in the in the wheel, so to speak, of the factory, and just being exploited for your labor and tossed out in the trash, so to speak, when your abilities have been used up, you're going to start to try to fight back, and this is going to start to lead to a very important labor movement that is going to define the late 19th century. This map here shows that there's going to be a number of workplace strikes that are going to be breaking out across America in the late 19th century. And these strikes are going to be the result mostly the result of organized unions that are going to be forming during this time period. Now, we've mentioned before that unions exist for the purpose of fighting for workers' rights. It might be workplace safety reforms, it might be better pay, shorter hours, all those kinds of things. But understand that unions are going to begin to form out of a sense that if they don't look out for each other, nobody else is going to look out for them. So unions, which were very few and far between before the Civil War and extremely weak, are now going to be multiplying in the late 19th century and having more of an impact. Now, some of these, groups that are going to be forming are going to be national groups, as we'll talk later about the Knights of Labor or the American Federation of Labor. Others are going to be, organized along, more ethnic lines. Like, for example, the Irish Molly Maguires that will be existing in Pennsylvania. Some of these groups are going to be, utilizing nonviolent means as a way to affect change, like picketing and stuff like that. Others, like the Molly Maguires, are going to be, using violent tactics to achieve their goals of safety and protection for workers. So understand there's going to be a wide range of different types of groups that are going to be emerging at this time. And as we start to see more and more unionization and organized labor happening, as you can imagine, business owners are not going to be liking this. They're going to be trying to, break unions at every possible step, and sometimes even bringing in hired thugs, one of which, probably the most famous, would be the Pinkerton Detective Agency. And basically what these groups were basically, as I said a moment ago, hired thugs that were brought in to basically beat up and physically intimidate striking workers. And, not afraid to use baseball bats, lead pipes, brass knuckles, and even firearms on occasion to try to end workplace shutdowns and, once again, intimidate workers to try to destroy unions and get them back to work. So as you can see here, you're going to start to see more and more of kind of an ugly, contentious relationship emerging between management and labor as we start to get into the late 19th century. And we'll get more into that contentiousness in our next video. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.